I think I heard you chanting before, but for my sake, let's chant Om 3 times. Right? To come together that way. We can close our eyes if you're comfortable doing so. When we chant mantras, we attune ourselves to the place in which we are already connected in a deeper way. So we can feel that as we chant, allow that chant to vibrate fully inside of us. Om. 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 Oh, Shanti. I'm happy to share some thoughts on this topic of healing the disease of busyness. Probably the first thing to say is there's nothing wrong with busyness. It's whether it's a disturbance to our ease. That's the problem. Earlier today, Shanti was wearing a t-shirt, peaceful, easeful, useful. So if we're at ease and peaceful and being useful, there's nothing wrong with being busy. So that's probably a relief to many of you, because probably many people are very busy, and you don't have to give up being busy. What we want to do is examine the ways that we suffer from being too busy, right? That we disturb our natural ease. That's what I want to speak about. Because the goal of all the spiritual paths is to experience our full human potential, right? To experience not just the body-mind, but also our divinity. And yoga helps us understand that divine nature is not something that we're intellectually going to comprehend. Right? Actually, Nalini and Maxine were saying something very much like this earlier this afternoon. We're not going to understand this divine nature, but we can experience. That's what yoga has to offer us, is that experience. And we describe that experience in so many ways. Being at peace, a natural sense of contentment, a natural sense of connection with the web of life. And that sense of connection compels us or leads to a natural kind of compassion for each other, a love for each other. It comes all very naturally when we experience that source within us. The problem is when we're disconnected from that source. And that's the messages of our world, of our culture, right? That teaches us to see ourselves primarily as a body-mind, as separate individuals. Right? Especially in the Western culture, we have this very science-oriented way of seeing life, seeing ourselves, seeing the world. In the science-oriented culture, seeing is believing. Right? We believe what we can see with the eyes, right? And if there's some truth, it should be researched, it should be scientifically proven, right? In order for people to believe it. But our physical lives are very limited, right? What we can really understand through scientific information is very limited. Even our eyes would tell us that the sun is traveling across the sky, for example. But we know that's not true. But that's what we see. We see the sun traveling across the sky. If we understood correctly, we would know that the earth is moving. We should be holding on because we're turning right now as we speak. Is it not so? So that's the problem, is that we live in a world that has ingrained in us this sense of a separate self, where we're cut off from the source of our inner, our natural contentment, our sense of connection with the web of life. And cut off from that web of life, we're vulnerable to the ever-changing world around us, right? We constantly go through moods, ups and downs, according to what happens. Right? And we end up in a relentless effort to acquire what seems to be missing, which is peace, or a sense of security, stability. And our culture teaches us to look for those things in the form of material things, in the form of the love of another person, in achievements. We end up in a never-ending process of acquiring, achieving, and arranging life in a way that we think will make us happy. And of course, there's nothing wrong with pursuing goals in life, arranging life, or working towards goals in life. It's only when we think that's the source of our happiness that becomes a problem. Because then our happiness comes and goes according to the way the wind blows, according to the way of events take place. And that's where the busyness becomes a problem if we experience it as an overwhelming or stressful or depressing set of circumstances. And it's difficult to overcome that, these messages from our culture. For most of us, if we grew up with those messages constantly being given to us, fed to us, through that repetition, those messages become a part of how we see the world. We didn't even ask for that, but that's what has become ingrained in us. Is this resonating with you all? Yeah. I always like to interact with whatever group I'm speaking to. So if there's any questions that come to mind, or any comments, examples that come to mind, please don't hesitate to raise your hand, speak up. Shanti, you could see if someone's asking a question from, yeah, good. Yeah, let me know. Yeah. So we have a lot to overcome if we want to really experience the truth, right? We have to, in a way, heal and transform the deeply ingrained messages that have been given to us through our culture, through the process of socialization. And in some ways, we're also kind of rowing against the flow of the stream around us. And that's why we need each other. Thank God there's such a vibrant spiritual community here in Gibraltar. I even walk down the street with Nalini and 3 or 4 people will greet her. Right? Didn't that happen to 2 or 3 people right away, right? Out on the street. So that's an important part of that spiritual path. And that's what I want to talk about is a few ideas for how we can establish ourselves, anchor ourselves in that source, that inner source that's unchanging and always dependable, and changes the way that we relate to the world around us, changes to the way that we experience the busyness of life. Right? And then we can enjoy the process, enjoy coming and going, enjoy all that arises, all that goes. So I'll make a few suggestions. And the first one is, if we really want to focus our lives in what's most important to us, we have to really think about what that is. That's another benefit of a spiritual community like this. But I have a recommendation that each person write something for themselves about what they see as the purpose of this lifetime. It's an excellent exercise. It means really reflecting. And I'll ask a few questions. You may not have, I see one person making some notes here. You may not have an opportunity to write something, but you can think a little bit about this. And when you have time, you might consider jotting down some ideas and eventually writing something for yourself. Like a business that has a mission statement, imagine having a personal mission statement that includes the way you see your life's purpose. So here's a few questions to consider. I have a few notes written down in this way. What do you want to experience with this lifetime? These are big questions. This is not a quick, easy thing to think over, right? But it's worth putting some time into this. I recommend it. What do you want to experience in this lifetime? How do you want to feel each day as you go through your life? What do you value the most about your life? So if we give some serious thought to these kind of questions and have in some one or two sentences, some idea about what I really want to do with this lifetime, that's a very valuable thing to have in the background of your mind. You know, a business that has a mission statement, any major choice that they make, decision they make about the business, whether to expand or whether to do this or whether to do that, it should be measured against that mission statement. And we have the same opportunity to make any major decision in our lives, even the general idea of how am I using my time and my energy in this lifetime? Is it in harmony with what I really want to achieve? What's really important to me, with my values? It's a great question. I like to ask myself that question periodically. Am I using my time and energy in harmony with what I really value? Because there are so many ways to use your time and energy, right? You could spend all of your time on the computer with social media, with entertainment, with many things that might be interesting. If I spent my time reading and watching everything that someone suggested to me I should read or watch, that's all I'd have time to do. You know what I mean? Yes. And it's much easier if we have a clear idea of what's really important to us. Some of you may have heard this little anecdote. I forget where I heard it many years ago, about a teacher who brought out from underneath the desk a large glass jar. And then he brought out a pail of rocks, and he filled the jar with rocks. Have you heard this little anecdote before? Yeah. And then he asked, is the jar full? And of course, there was no more room for any more of the rocks. So it appeared to be full. But then he brought out smaller rocks, right? And he poured the smaller rocks in amongst the bigger ones, and then asked again, is the jar full? And someone said yes, because it certainly appeared that way. But then he brought out a pitcher or pail with some sand, and he carefully, slowly poured the sand in around the smaller rocks, and then asked again, is it full? What do you think? Was it full then? No, because he had a pitcher of water, right? And he poured the water slowly, slowly, and there was more room for more water. And then he asked about what can we learn from this? And someone said, if you try hard enough, you can always squeeze something more into your schedule. The point was, if you want the big rocks to be in the jar, they have to go in first. And the whole idea behind the little exercise was that the most important things in life, you should make those the priority. You could make sure that you fit them into your schedule first. Meaning that maybe in the planning of your week that's coming up, you know which things you want to make sure that you reserve space for in your schedule, and you book them into your schedule first. And maybe you have things that you book into every week of your schedule. But only if you make an appointment for those things, right, can you be sure that you'll reserve time for them. Right? How many times have you heard someone say, or have you found yourself saying yourself, yes, I know that I want to meditate, or I want to practice hatha yoga, or I want to attend yoga class, but I'm too busy. Right? Have you ever had that experience? Feeling that way? Yeah, sure. Everybody. Yeah. Yeah. Many years ago, practicing yoga on my own, I didn't really have a spiritual community where I was living. I couldn't keep it up. I didn't have the support of a group that I could practice with. I was teaching yoga in my city in Kentucky. And I realized I couldn't do it by myself. I ended up moving to live with the spiritual communities where I could practice regularly, where I had the support that I needed. So you are fortunate that you have the support right here. But my suggestion is that you think about the overarching purpose, what you value the most. You write it down for yourself. It's different if it's written down. Then it's not a vague idea, it's something concrete. It's on paper. And of course you can change it. It may evolve. You may become clearer and clearer about what it is, all the better. But then that helps make decisions about what's really important and how you want to spend your time and energy. And of course, if you're serious about spiritual life, then one of the big rocks should be spiritual practice. Right? To live a spiritual life is only possible if we're practicing in some way. Right? And there are multiple ways to practice. As an integral yoga center, you know the integral yoga approach. There's all the different branches of yoga that can be practiced. Right? Even your self-service can be your spiritual practice. Yeah. Swami Satchidananda, my guru, would say, even your eating and sleeping can be a part of your spiritual practice if you eat and sleep in order to keep yourself in good shape so that you can serve well. Right? So there's the spiritual practice is something we can integrate into all of our lives. I'll talk more about that tomorrow night. But for sure, one very beneficial part of spiritual practice is meditation. Right? Some meditative practice, right? Some way on a regular basis. We were talking about this afternoon, right? On a regular basis, right? To quiet the mind so that we can experience something beyond the mind and the thoughts. The mind and thoughts are very limited. The thoughts that are in our minds, many of them came from the messages of our culture that have been seeped into, through repetition over and over, into our subconscious mind, and still to some degree govern the way that we experience the world around us. How does the subconscious mind get changed? How do we change the way that we relate to the world? You know how it is when something, you have all the intentions to live a peaceful life, to be compassionate, but then something happens that triggers this feeling yoga class. You're in a great space, but then somebody cuts you off in traffic, and before you know it, you're shouting some curse words at them. Right? That ever happened to anybody? It's so easy because we even say it this way: we got triggered. Somebody pushed my button, and then the question becomes, well, it's your button. How did it get there? And what can you do about that? One of the benefits of a spiritual practice that's done on a regular basis, it begins to create new messages that also become impressions, that also, through repetition, go into our subconscious mind and begin to change the structure, the inner structure of the subconscious mind, right? That help us relate to and interpret the events in our lives in a different way from a spiritual perspective. One of the most fundamental things we learn on the spiritual path is that you cannot control the world around you. Of course, you can work towards achieving your goals. You may be able to make beautiful things happen. There's nothing wrong with that. But to think that you can control what's going to happen in the world around us, we've all learned that that's not possible. What is the one thing that is within our control is how we respond to what happens. We can make all our best efforts. If our best efforts fail, how do we? That's within our control. That's where we have a choice. And oftentimes, the way that we respond to what happens around us is due to the way that we interpret those events. Interpretation. The course is just coming to an end. A course I've been helping to teach. Called Stress Management TT. It's going on right now still. That course ends next weekend. Vidyananda, Swami Vidyananda, living at the ashram in Virginia, and I have been teaching that course. And that's one of the things that we discuss. Why is one event stressful, or why is it not stressful to another person? For example, if we were told that we all have an opportunity to go parachuting tomorrow, how many people are going to stay home? How many of you are going to stay home? Yeah, but how many people might enjoy an opportunity to try something exciting like that? Who's got their hands up? Yeah. So why is it an adventure, an excitement, and something interesting to do for some people, and for other people, it's something absolutely to avoid? Why is that? It's all due to the way that we interpret that event, or the association that we have with that situation, and everything that we experience in life. Right? There's nothing that says that we have to interpret anything as bad, as stressful, as a reason to be sad or depressed or upset or angry. Right? It's all up to us and how we interpret that event. And how we interpret those events is to a large extent governed by what we have fed ourselves, how we've nourished ourselves, the impressions that we've taken in over time that have shaped the person that we are, right? The identity that we've taken on. By a regular meditative practice, we begin to experience, not just think about, not conceptualize, but actually experience this unchanging sense of contentment or happiness or peace, whatever you want to call it, right? It's a source of unchanging inner stability. And from that rooted foundation, we can more easily move around in life without being thrown off balance. I like to use the analogy of a tree. It's a good analogy for meditation practice. The way a tree grows. As you look day by day, as I remember when my father planted a tree just behind the windows of my bedroom, right? An oak tree. And I would run out in the morning and look at the tree to see if it had grown. You don't see anything happening, right? Day by day. But over a period of time, I could see that the tree was growing in comparison to the window. So over time, you could get a sense that the tree was growing. But what I never saw was the way the tree was growing underneath the earth. And that's where the real action was happening, because that's what's giving the tree the stability, the deeply rooted ability to grow tall on the surface. Right? And that's what's protecting the tree from falling over if there's a strong wind. The same with us. We may not feel that our meditation practice is making much happen. Right? Have you ever had that experience of meditating and feeling like, well, my mind was all over the place? If that ever happened to you, is it only me? Thank you for that reassurance. Yeah. But what we never see, because it's not visible to us, is the way that our meditation practice is organically growing and changing our subconscious mind and impacting the way that we experience ourselves. Those little tastes of peace that we have at the end of a meditation practice or a yoga class, or the sense of fulfillment that we experience after serving in some way that we really give love. All of those things give us a taste of our true nature. And the repeated experience of that true nature begins to transform the way that we experience ourselves and the way that we relate to the world. And the more that we cultivate that unchanging sense of stability, the more that we change the way we relate to the world around us. And we develop through a regular meditation practice, we develop what I like to call a non-reactive awareness, an ability to see, even when we get upset, to see it, not just to be swept away by it, but to see what's happening. So by our yoga practice, we don't expect ourselves to no longer experience anger or frustration or irritation, no longer experience depression or grief. Those are a natural part of human life. We don't expect ourselves to be free of that. One spiritual teacher said, our spiritual practice doesn't make us free of experiencing these emotions, but free to have them, right? Free to be with them, free to learn from them, free to experience what they're telling us about our relationship with life. We learn a lot from experiencing them. That non-reactive awareness allows us to be conscious of what's happening inside of us, conscious of what's happening around us, and then make skillful choices based on that information. I'll tell a little story to illustrate this. I forget when this happened. When I lived it was after I moved to San Francisco, so it must have been around 2012. I was teaching a course, the same course, Stress Management TT, at the San Francisco Institute. And one of our yoga teachers was taking that course. So it's a course in which we train yoga teachers to teach yoga for more institutional settings, where the Sanskrit language and the spiritual way of talking about yoga and its goals may not be so welcome. Where talking about life skills is more appreciated. So we're going through this course, and all of us are looking at the ways that we experience stress as a part of the course. And this one teacher, participant in the course, named Ishwari, she told the story of something that happened to her at work. She was working in a corporate environment, right? A very busy corporate environment where there's a lot of stress, a lot of pressure on the workers to perform, to be productive. That's the culture that we live in. I was talking about the culture that we live in. It values productivity, right? Even how do they measure the success of a country? The gross national product. Right? That's the culture that we live in, that values productivity. So that's ingrained in us. Are you productive? So she's working in this corporate environment. And on this particular day, the family is having a special event for a member of the family. And they're a little irritated with her for how often she tends to come home late from work, because there's always more to do. Right? And it's difficult for her to leave sort of on schedule, right, and get home. So this particular day, they're stressing the importance of her to get home on time for the family event. And that day, her boss, as usual, has given her a big load of work to do. And she's already struggling with thinking, I don't know if I'm going to succeed. And that's already made her anxious about how it's going to go that day. So she's working kind of furiously already. And then her boss's boss came to her and he said, I'm in a meeting and I need something presented to me for use in that meeting. And I need you to work on that right away, right now, and send it to me by email so that I can make use of it. I forget how she described what he was asking her to do. And then he walks away. So she's already got so much work to do. She's already got her family worried about whether she's going to come home on time. And now her boss's boss is giving something else on top of that. Can you imagine how she experienced that? She was anxious about the work already, anxious about the family already. And now she's a little irritated, or you could say angry at the boss's boss for marching in without knowing what she already has to do and giving her something else and not really giving her a choice. So she's got all of this stuff going on. I don't know how you would call it here in Gibraltar, but in the US, it's often termed freaking out. Does that convey? How would you call it? What would you say here? Freaking out. Jeez, like, right? And of course, she's not verbally expressing it that way, but inside, she's freaking out. Right? Fortunately, she's a yoga teacher, and she has a spiritual foundation, and she sees, I'm freaking out. What am I going to do? What is my family going to say if I come home late? What is my boss's boss going to do if I don't get this to him in time? He needs it right away. What is my boss going to say if I'm not doing what he gave me to do? You can see the whole thing. Her mind is all over the map. So she finally says to herself, okay, let me calm down. Let me take a breath. She closes her eyes. This is her own description. Closes her eyes, takes a few deep breaths, calm down. All right, let me analyze the situation. So she has to step back, right? She has to step back from all that emotion that she's got going on and take a look at the situation and reflect, right? This is made possible, in my mind, it's only made possible by some regular practice. Otherwise, you just are like floating away in this torrent of emotion, right? Lost in all of that, right? And frantically making choices that you might regret later. But she pauses, she thinks about it, she realizes, all right, the boss's boss, he's the one, I have to listen to him, I don't have a choice. I have to zero in on, I can't think about my family or my boss, I have to think of this task. This is what he's given me, this is what I have to do. Let me give all my attention to that one that one task that I must complete. And she realizes that part of the disturbance in her mind is the fact she doesn't have everything she needs in order to do what he wants. But she knows someone that she does, because he does. She contacts a fellow employee. He sends her that information. She uses that information to design it into the form that the boss's boss wants. And she sends it off to him. It takes her about 20 minutes to complete this project. Having finished that project and knowing that she's done exactly what he asked, she's a little exhilarated by the success she's just experienced. And she goes back into the other work that she had. She completes it on time. She goes home on time. She has the time with her family. Everything comes out good. I thought, wow, what a great example Because you could see how it could go the other way. But what enabled her was the foundation of this kind of inner stability that she established through her regular practice that allowed her to see what was happening inside of herself and around her and make a choice based on all the information that she had. Wow, what a great, great thing. What a beautiful example. So that's, I guess the first recommendation I'm making is this idea of establishing an overarching purpose for one's life. And the second recommendation I'm making is making a spiritual practice one of those essential items that we fit into every day of our lives. We were just quoting from the Yoga Sutras this afternoon. The steadiness of mind. Some of you could say this just as easily as me. Right? The steadiness over a long period of time without break. This is a good group. I love it. Yeah. It's right there. Written, what, 2,000 years before. Still holds true. So that's one of the big rocks, one of the most important things that we fit into our lives. And from that, so many skills come, so many benefits come. Let me pause here. Any comments or questions from you all? Is this all resonating? Is it making sense? Yeah. Good. Okay, I'll continue. From this, another recommendation is to keep our lives simple in certain ways. Right? Another Swami Divyananda, she gives a whole talk on what she calls decluttering. Right? When our lives are filled with too many things, too many activities, too many goals, too many interests, we spread ourselves too thin. Of course, there's nothing wrong. I want to say again, as I did in the beginning, there's nothing wrong with being busy and having a number of different things that we want to pursue in our lives. We're energized, we're passionate about the things that we really believe in, right? But we can also overdo it. So it's good to be really clear about the things that are most important to us. And in addition to our spiritual practice, I would say another one of those big rocks is spiritual community. It's very difficult to row upstream if you're by yourself fighting against the stream of the world around you. Whereas when you're in the midst of spiritual community, it's like rowing downstream. If you stop rowing, you'll still be going in the right direction, right? Because the stream, the energy around you is still helping you move forward in the right direction. So some regular, and maybe I don't need to talk much about this for this kind of group, right? Some regular attendance at spiritual community, even if it's online, right? Some way of reinforcing the values, the intention, the overarching purpose that we tend to share in spiritual community. And of course, everyone has a livelihood, so that's a necessary. To think, oh, having a job, living out in the world, having work, that's a distraction from my spiritual path, right? And I chose the monastic path thinking, okay, I'm going to devote my life to having a spiritual practice and living in spiritual community. And then what happened to me soon after I moved into spiritual community? I was assigned to work in a natural food store outside the ashram. First thing. And this served a number of purposes. The ashram needed some income. Right? So by working in this natural food store that was owned by one of the Sangha members, one of the community members, I was able to bring home some cash, a paycheck, right, which I gave to the ashram, so they had some support there. And at the same time, I was being trained, right, to learn how to manage things, because I was coming in as a young person without much worldly experience. So I had to be shaped up before I could be useful. Right? So there I was, and working working out in the world, and it wasn't a distraction from my spiritual life. That was where I needed to learn certain lessons. So I like to remind everyone that the fact that someone has a job that doesn't look on the outside spiritual, right? I had to learn how to read a business report, right? A profit and loss statement, right? We learn many things by working in the world. And Gurudev wanted us, Swami Satchidananda wanted us to be engaged in the world and to bring our spiritual practice into the daily life in that way. So obviously that needs to be some other, for most people, that needs to be one of the other major things in their lives. But I want to emphasize the idea of bringing our spirituality into that daily life, into that work life. And again, I'll talk more about that tomorrow. One way that I want to speak about sort of limiting how expansive we are with what we're concerned about and what we put our time and energy into is something that I read many years ago that I was reminded of recently. There was a book by an author named Stephen Covey called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Yeah, some of you have heard of this book. Yeah. How many people read that book? Yeah. A few. Okay, all right, good. Yeah, if I forget when it was written. I read it in the early 90s, I think. It was very useful. I could recommend it. It wasn't overtly spiritual, but there was a spiritual foundation to it. But I can share a couple of things that I found really useful that I still remember. And one of them, I have already talked about a little bit. One of them was a principle called first things first. The things that are most important, give those things the highest priority. But another one was something that the author described as a circle of influence and a circle of concern. And the circle of influence is the circle in which you're personally engaged and you have an opportunity to influence the people, the events around you. So this would be the place where you work and your family and your spiritual community, the people that you interact with, the people that you're directly involved with. And the circle of concern would be the events about which in the world you might be concerned. And that could be quite expensive. If you're interested in the climate crisis, that might be something that you pay attention to. If you check the news regularly, right, you might be aware of world events. Right? You might be interested in the coronation that's happening soon in the UK. When is that? Saturday. Yeah. How many things? I mean, you could be concerned about many things. And that what the author suggested is that the bigger your area of concern, the smaller your area of influence was going to be, because you're putting so much of your mental energy or even your time in keeping track of things that are going on around you that you may not have that much, you don't have that much influence over. A number of us in San Francisco for some years now have been really concerned about the climate crisis, but more in the last few years have become very concerned about what we call social injustice, because it's become highlighted to us more and more, the injustice of racism and the history of racism in the United States. And we formed a small group that we call the Spiritual Action Initiative. The goal of that group is to do something about it, right? Instead of just hearing about it. And what we come to understand is that because in the beginning, we were spending a lot of time informing ourselves about all of these problems. And one friend of ours, a teacher of ours, described it as the polycrisis, right? Multiple overlapping crises, right? That happen in the political realm, in the financial world, in the world of war and refugee crisis. Then there was COVID as another crisis, one crisis after another, overlapping and reinforcing each other. And we spent a lot of time informing ourselves about all these difficult things and all these terrible things that are going on. And we realized that we're spinning our wheels, putting too much time into educating ourselves rather than actually doing something. And we shifted from putting our focus on just informing ourselves to actually doing something. And this past, just April 22nd, in the United States, is called Earth Day. I don't know if you heard of that or you have something similar here. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So on Earth Day, we had a program. We invited our students, our teachers, our community to meet in the local park just down the street from the Institute. And I brought with me a bunch of garbage bags and gloves. And we went through our neighborhood area picking up trash. And that's how we celebrated Earth Day. And this was part of our circle of influence. Right? We can't do something about all the world problems, but we did something in the present moment, right? And we picked up a lot of trash. We had an envision that a vision that we would travel so many streets to a certain street and then walk down that street and then work our way back, but we didn't even get that far. When we really started to pay attention, we found a lot of trash. There are certain small minor streets that aren't cleaned by the cities, right? The city's street cleaning, right? Some of the smaller streets. Oh my gosh. And it felt pretty good, actually. We came back to the Institute, had a yoga nidra and a nice meal together. It was a great activity. But the point is that we focused in on our circle of influence where we could really make a difference. And that was what we're hoping to do in the future as going forward, is to focus on the things that we can actually make a difference, right? Rather than just being overwhelmed by the complexity of the problems in our world. So it's something interesting for every one of us to think about. What kind of a difference can I make? Right? There's no doubt, and probably we all have this sense just from that quote that I mentioned earlier on Shanti's t-shirt. It's easeful, peaceful, it's not enough. We want to be useful. And if we are easeful and peaceful, certainly we'll be put to good use. That's what's fulfilling for us. And of course, there is a use. Not everyone is cut out to pick up garbage on the street, right? Not everyone has the health, right, to do certain activities. Not everyone's meant to be a yoga teacher by instructing yoga at the front of the class. But every one of us here can teach yoga by the way that we place our shoes, by the way that we interact with the clerk at the store and in traffic. Right? We teach yoga in all of these ways. And this is where we have influence over the world around us. Some years ago, there was a movie, and I forget where this term came from, but the movie had this title, Pay It Forward. Right? You're familiar with that term? Yeah. And it means you experience an act of kindness, right, that someone offers to you. Right? And you don't have to give it back to that person. You don't have to owe them anything, right? But you pay it forward in some other place. Gurudev's often spoken about exactly the same idea. Right? That you receive so much and you return that debt by offering something, by being useful, by being helpful somewhere in the world. In fact, Gurudev would say, we're all debtors in a way, because of look at all that we've been given by the earth, by the air, the water, It's all been given to us. So it's natural for us, once we really appreciate what's been given to us and experience the abundance that we've received, right, to want to give back in some way. And I started to say, not everyone is cut out to pick up garbage on the street or teach yoga classes in a formal way, but everyone can pray for the world around us. Right? That's why we've been instructed to chant Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Right? May the entire universe be filled with peace and joy. That's why we chant that mantra at the end of every yoga session, at the end of every satsang, right? As a way of sharing whatever benefit we've received right away and sending peaceful, healing energy out into the world. So to me, that's a beautiful element of spiritual life, to pray for the well-being of the world, with a real sincere heart. So that's something else that anyone can add into their day, and in a way expands the idea of a circle of influence. This woman, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, was someone who specialized in working with those who were dying. And she wrote, there's several books by her. And many people found great benefit from learning from her how to be with someone who's dying and how to die themselves. Anyway, she told the story of how once she was driving in the Alps on a narrow mountain road and came to a place where the traffic was completely stopped. No cars moving at all. And people were even getting out of their cars because there wasn't an opportunity to go, and they wanted to understand what was happening. And the word passed down from far ahead that someone had been in an accident and someone was badly injured. And so people are like looking at their watches and grumbling and wondering when they're finally going to be able to move. And she thought to herself, well, there's no sense of just complaining. Let me pray for the person who's been injured. So she went back into her car to focus herself. She sat inside of her car, closed her eyes, and began to pray the Hail Mary prayer, the Catholic prayer. And then she had this thought, what if the person I'm praying for isn't Catholic? That's the right way to pray. She hesitated for a minute or so, and then she thought, well, that's what I know. That's the way I'm going to pray. She continued her prayer for some time. And finally, of course, the traffic moved, the car was pushed to the side, the person was taken away. And a few weeks went by, and then she received a phone call. And the person calling said, please forgive me, but I need to ask you a few questions. I'm trying to find out if you were one of the people who was in that line of cars backed up in the Alps. Were you there? And she said, yes, I was there. And the questioner said, and were you driving such and such car with such and such license plate? She was able, this person was able to name the license plate. And she said, yes, that's my car, that's my license plate. She thought, well, it must have been another driver that saw my car. And then the person asking the questions, the caller said, and were you praying for the person who was injured? Now this is getting a little spooky for her. Like, And did you hesitate in your praying? And she thought, oh my God, how could this person possibly know that? I didn't tell anybody about that. It turns out the caller was the person who was injured, who experienced themselves after the accident, floating away from their own body, floating away from the scene, but attracted by the prayers so that she hovered over the car of the person who was praying, saw the car so clearly that she knew the car and even saw the license plate, right? And remained there, attracted by the prayers, by the energy of those prayers, until she was awakened in her own body again. She'd been revived. And she remembered that clearly enough that she could still recall the car itself and the license plate. So if we ever have doubts about whether our prayers make a difference, boy, that's just blew my mind to hear that. Right? Prayers are operating on a different level of existence. Right? They don't exist bound by the laws of time and space the way that we know them. Depending on the way that we ask, if we ask with a sincere heart to be guided, not ask for something specific that we think would be nice for us, but ask for the guidance to receive what we need. That's a different form of asking. Because when we ask with a willingness to receive whatever guidance we're given, that means we're willing to set aside our own personal preferences, our own desires. Right? You can only open your heart fully to receive guidance if you're willing to give up what you'd like. Right? As long as you're holding on to what I'd like, could this please be the answer? Then your heart is still blocked from the receptivity you need to really be guided. But as soon as you have that sincere willingness to accept the guidance, now when we pray in a selfish way, our hearts are partly closed, right? Because our energy is inward. If we pray for something that enables us to be of service, right? If we pray for guidance in a way that can help us we pray for the strength to face some difficulty. If we pray for a parking spot so that we can do something useful, beneficial, right? It's a different energy.
Sometimes when you ask and you get a parking, it reinforces that soul is with you and guiding you and looking up to you. And so it gives you the confidence to carry on.
Yeah, beautiful.
And it opens up your heart.
But what I would suggest is to pray in whatever way we understand the presence of the divine, whatever form, whatever inspires us. And if it is another person, a saintly being, a grandmother figure, to pray with that sincerity. Then we open ourselves to receive. The benefit of prayer comes when we're opening ourselves fully to receive. Right? Otherwise, we're blocking the message. The parking space reminds me of a little anecdote I heard of someone who was desperately looking for a parking space, and he wasn't getting it. So he started to bargain with God. Well, God, if you give me a parking space, I promise not to drink on the weekends. Still not finding a parking space. Then, all right, I'll go to church every Sunday. Right? He wasn't a regular, attending regularly. And right after he made that commitment, the parking space showed up. And he said, never mind, I found one. You don't need to look anymore. I found one myself. Not the best way to pray. Yeah, we have to learn how to pray in the right way. There's really a prayer for guidance. So when we're faced with a difficult situation, it's a beautiful act to do. When you're really struggling or upset or facing something overwhelming, some real difficult situation, when you've lost someone that you love and you're distressed, right? Praying is a beautiful thing to do. But the ideal way to pray is not for something specific, but for the strength to do the right thing, right? To know what's the right thing. Because when our minds are disturbed, we can't see clearly what's the right thing to do. Right? So that's the kind of prayer that actually brings us to a similar place that meditation does. When we meditate, we're actually quieting our minds so that we can receive the messages of our own spiritual self. Our own spiritual consciousness is connected to that universal consciousness. We're gaining access to that. Right? So when we pray with that kind of sincere willingness to do whatever, to receive whatever is meant for us, then we come to the same place. We quiet our minds and our hearts enough that we have access to that consciousness within us.
We don't always know what's good for us.
No, we
We
don't.
think we want something because we think it's good for us, but
Yeah.
maybe that's not part of what's meant for us.
True, exactly.
Maybe not getting the parking can save your life.
Maybe.
Maybe going around the parking.
Yeah,
lots
exactly.
to get you, so you never know what karmic situation you're in, so
And then we'll
I'm not asking specifically, you're open to the best outcome.
We've all experienced something like that, where we're going in this direction, we're sure it's the right thing, and it turns out that it was completely the wrong way to be going. I think simply the willingness to reflect, am I using my time and energy in harmony with what I really value, in harmony with my vision for the purpose of this lifetime? What a great question, and something to keep asking regularly. And if we're sincere with that question, it will always inspire us to do some form of spiritual practice, because that's what lays the foundation for us to lead a spiritual life. That's what anchors us to a source that's unchanging and gives us the stability from which we can move around in the world without losing ourselves in the world. The world is full of glitter, right? We walk down the street, Tanya and Daya and I walk down Main Street. Oh, so many shops, so many restaurants, so many pastries in the window. There was one shot, the chocolate shop,
Yeah.
and the pastries in the window. Oh. So many distractions. The world is full of that. At this place, that vacation place, this place, this experience. It's all so much distraction. In a way, the world seems designed to pull us outward, right? But by trying to find happiness in all those ways, we learn that none of it is going to bring us happiness without first finding it within. Right? Then we can enjoy what's appropriate, what's healthy for us, right? Without losing ourselves in the world. Let me end by reading a poem. It's called The Summer Day, and it's by a poet named Mary Oliver. I don't know if some of you would have heard of her. Wonderful poetry. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Love that poem. I think one of the big rocks that I want to keep in my life is the moments that I spend in nature. A natural form of spiritual community, the redwood trees that I have access to, they're neighbors to me. I find such community in nature.
They say that the redwood trees, the roots all those things. It's beautiful.
There's an underground community amongst the trees. But let's conclude more formally with chanting. I think many of you know these chants that are used at the end of yoga class. We can chant those together. Asato na sadgaya. Tamaso na chutiraya. Gamaya. Real to real. Lead us from darkness to the light. Lead us from the fear of death to the knowledge of immortality. Shanti, Shanti. Loka samasta sukhi. Peace and glory and love. May the light of truth dispel all ignorance. Victory to that light. Jai Sri Satguru Maharaj Ki Jai. Thank you all for your kind attention. Thank you for an opportunity to share a little bit.